Imagine having a performing career that lasts 80 years. Just think about that. A pianist captivating audiences from childhood right through to old age.
Incredible longevity
Yeah.
and depth.
That's Claudio Arrau. And today we're starting a journey really trying to understand the roots of his artistry.
And our map for this is Victoria A. von Arch's book, Piano Lessons with Claudio Arrau, a guide to his philosophy and techniques.
It's a fantastic resource.
It really is. Von Arch's, she's connected to Arrau's teaching lineage herself, through her own teachers. And she's gathered Arrau's own words, student accounts, even bits from lessons.
Like a window into his world.
Exactly. A real treasure trove if you're curious about what made him tick, musically speaking.
Welcome to Piano Night Studio, a podcast where music, piano, and literature come together. Here, we explore the stories behind the notes, the lives of composers and performers, and the books that have shaped the musical world. Whether you're a pianist, a passionate listener, or simply someone who finds beauty in the sound of a single note, this space is for you. In each episode, we go through ideas, emotions, and the timeless connection between music and words. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, so let's jump in. The first big name, Martin Krause, chapter 1 in the book.
Krause, Arrau's main teacher in Berlin, what was it, 1913 to 1918?
That's the period. But the book stresses he wasn't just a teacher, was he? Especially after Arrau's father passed away?
No, not at all. He became much more a mentor, definitely, but also kind of a father figure for the young Claudio.
That personal connection must have been huge.
Oh, absolutely. Profound impact. Musically, sure, but personally, too.
Yeah.
It really shows you how crucial that early mentorship can be,
And here's the first big connection. Krause studied with Franz Liszt.
Boom. Right away, you see this link. Arrau, from the get-go, is tied into this major lineage, this grand tradition of virtuoso playing.
That's piano playing with incredible technical skill, real brilliance.
And being part of that tradition, even indirectly through Krause, it must have shaped how Arrau saw himself, his ambitions.
Sets a certain standard, doesn't it? A weight of history, perhaps?
Definitely. It raises that question, how does belonging to a lineage affect an artist's self-image?
So, what was Krause's teaching like? Was it all about finger exercises, technique?
Well, the book suggests it was broader than that, more encompassing.
Like a cultural education?
Yeah, that seemed to be the idea. Krause aimed for a wider foundation: literature, arts, philosophy, kind of the whole intellectual climate, a more holistic development.
Which is really interesting because Arrau himself later on kind of downplayed Krause's role in his specific technique. He often said his technique felt more innate.
Right, and there's the fascinating tension. You have this strong mentorship steeped in tradition, yet the artist himself feels the core of his ability came from within.
Nature versus nurture, right there in his own account.
Exactly. Krause's guidance was vital. The environment was crucial, no doubt. But Arrau's own talent, his natural physical coordination perhaps, was clearly immense.
Makes you wonder how much is learned, how much is just there.
It's the perennial question in art.
And then a really difficult moment happened in 1918. Krause died suddenly.
Yeah, leaving Arrau, who was only 15, without his guide.
15. That must have forced him to figure things out on his own, a real turning point.
Absolutely. The book points to this period of intense self-reflection, forced self-analysis, you can say. It likely pushed him towards that deeply thoughtful approach he became known for.
A challenge that ultimately spurred growth.
Sometimes the biggest leaps happen that way, don't they?
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Chapter 2. Arrau and the Lisztian legacy. We touched on Liszt via Krause, but this goes deeper. Arrau really felt connected to Liszt.
Oh, strongly. He spoke about it often. And it wasn't just him. His students picked up on it too. They genuinely felt Arrau's teaching was continuing, even refining Liszt's principles.
The book quotes people like Rosalina Guerrero-Saxton, Anna Bronstein-Barton.
Yes, they talk about being part of this Lisztian school through Arrau. It shows the real power of believing in an artistic lineage.
And apparently, Arrau and his assistant, Rafael de Silva, actively promoted this. The book mentions a 1965 Munich masterclass flyer.
Right. They consciously leaned into that connection. It suggests, wanting to place his teaching within that celebrated history. It adds a certain weight, a prestige.
Aligning yourself with the greats. A way to build identity.
Pretty much. A standard strategy for artists, in a way.
But here's where it gets a bit tricky, historically speaking.
Uh-huh. The book brings this up, too.
Some of Liszt's own students said he didn't really teach technique systematically. It was more about the music, the interpretation.
Exactly. So that idea of the direct, step-by-step technical inheritance from Liszt, well, it's debatable. The historical evidence is a bit murky.
So the connection might have been more philosophical, or about a certain sound ideal.
That's more likely. Shared musical values, maybe performance aesthetics, rather than Krause showing Arrau specific exercises Liszt showed him, if that makes sense.
It raises that question again, how much is fact? How much is interpretation or even myth-making around these lineages?
It's a critical point. We have to be careful about taking these lines too literally sometimes.
And then Arrau adds his own layer, saying his technique was fundamentally instinctive. So, Krause, Liszt, instinct. What gives?
That's probably a mix, isn't it? His own physical gifts were surely the foundation. But, and this is key, according to the book, Arrau's belief in the Liszt connection was incredibly powerful for him.
So it didn't matter as much if the historical line was perfectly straight.
For his artistic identity, maybe not. That feeling of kinship, that sense of carrying on Liszt's spirit, that was a huge source of inspiration. It framed how he saw his own place in music history.
The self-perception being as important as the objective fact.
Absolutely. That belief fueled him.
Okay, let's bring in the third figure. Rudolf Breithaupt, Chapter 3. He came after Krause at the Stern Conservatory, where Arrau also later taught.
Right. Breithaupt, a really significant name in piano pedagogy around the turn of the 20th century.
What was his main thing?
Arm weight. He is a major proponent of using the natural weight of the arm, not just finger power, to play, aiming for a richer sound, less physical strain.
The natural piano technique books. I've heard of those.
Exactly. His big 2-volume work, very influential. He wasn't alone, though.
No.
The book places him in this wider context, people thinking about physiology, psychology, even philosophy, and how it relates to playing the piano. Figures like Elizabeth Callan, Tobias Mattei.
So piano teaching itself was revolving, becoming more scientific, maybe.
Sort of, yeah. Moving beyond just purely mechanical drills, thinking about the whole body-mind connection. Breithaupt was right in the thick of that movement.
And Arrau knew Breithaupt and his work.
Yes. Personally acquainted. And Arrau definitely read his writings. The book suggests Breithaupt significantly influenced Arrau's thinking about technique.
How so? Any examples?
Well, Arrau apparently saw Teresa Carreño, a huge pianist back then, actually change her playing based on Breithaupt's ideas. That must have made an impression.
Wow. And Arrau spoke well of Breithaupt's books later.
He did. Mentioned them positively, suggesting they held real insights. There's even a story, an anecdote, of Arrau playing for Breithaupt.
Oh, yeah. How did that go?
Breithaupt was apparently very enthusiastic.
Yeah.
Which for a young Arrau must have been quite validating.
A direct thumbs up from a leading theorist. Nice.
That personal encouragement, that positive feedback probably spurred him on.
But here's what seems really crucial. The book's big insight on Breithaupt, maybe. He gave Arrau a structure and vocabulary.
Yes, that's the key takeaway. Concepts like vibration, rotation, relaxation. Breithaupt provided Arrau with a language to understand and, importantly, articulate what he was likely already doing somewhat intuitively.
So it helped him move from just doing it to understanding and being able to explain it.
Precisely. It gave him a framework. Imagine, especially after Krause died and he was figuring things out himself, and later when he started teaching, having those concepts, that vocabulary, would have been invaluable.
It helps solidify instinct into a conscious method. That's a huge step.
A real aha moment, as you said. It connects the intuitive playing with a theoretical understanding. Martin Krause.
His teacher.
Mhm.
Such a pivotal relationship. We want to unpack Krause himself, his background.
His teaching methods, definitely, and the huge impact he had on Arrau's early years.
Exactly. Our mission really is to see how this mentorship formed the bedrock, the foundation for Arrau's skills and his whole artistic path.
It's amazing how it even started. Edwin Fischer, right?
Yeah.
A big name already.
Yeah, and he hears this young Arrau claiming, I have the entire works of Bach.
Wow. And Fischer immediately thinks of Krause. That tells you something right there.
It does, but it wasn't quite that simple. There was, Rosita Renard.
Ah, the Chilean pianist. Yeah, she played a key role.
Because Arrau's first studies in Berlin, they weren't really clicking. He was even losing interest in the piano.
Hard to imagine now. But yes, Renard was the one who stepped in. She had to persuade Krause.
Persuade him. He was reluctant to take on Arrau.
Apparently so. Maybe wary of, the whole child prodigy thing. But Renard made the case.
And Arrau starts studying with him at 10 years old. That's the turning point.
A massive one. And Krause, well, he wasn't just any teacher.
No kidding. His background is incredible. Studied with Liszt himself.
Knew Liszt's other pupils, had connections to Brahms, Clara Schumann, Busoni. I mean, wow.
And he founded the first Liszt Society in Leipzig. Championed tons of new music, wrote criticism too.
So he had this direct line to the Romantic tradition, especially Liszt, but also a really broad musical and analytical mind.
And his role went way beyond music lessons, didn't it? He became like a mentor.
Almost a father figure, you could say, especially after Arrau's own father had passed away.
Right. He's overseeing practice, meals, taking him to concerts, opera, guiding his general education.
He really believed interpretation came from broad cultural knowledge. That's where Arrau's lifelong reading habit came from.
Arrau said Krause taught him to read methodically. It wasn't just about piano.
No, he was shaping the whole person, the artist, introducing him to important musicians, managing his early career.
Which took off fast. His Berlin debut at 11, playing with Nickisch, Muck, Furtwängler.
And winning prizes by age 12. Krause was clearly making things happen.
But then, tragically and so suddenly, Krause dies in 1918. Arrau's only 15.
Just 5 years with Krause. But those 5 years were absolutely foundational.
They gave him his technique, his musical grounding, repertoire, performing experience.
And that deep connection to the German tradition, particularly Liszt. Arrau talked about carrying on a specific legacy.
Now, here's a fascinating bit. For someone so influential, there's surprisingly little direct evidence of his teaching methods.
Right. No writings from Krause, nothing from his students, really. We rely on others like Weizmann, his obituary.
And Arrau's own memories, looking back, which makes piecing it together a bit of a puzzle.
Definitely. We know some things, though. Krause studied at Leipzig, focused on that singing tone, flexible wrist.
And he specialized in Beethoven, sort of foreshadowing Arrau's own connection, right? Arrau felt spiritually related to Beethoven.
And crucially, Krause met Liszt, played for him, spent time in Weimar. He absorbed that tradition directly.
Weizmann called Krause's teaching a faithful and scientifically exact maintenance of the Liszt tradition.
Yeah, suggesting it wasn't just vibes, it was studied, detailed. His obituary also mentions the singing tone achieved through relaxation.
Relaxed arms, hands, precise attack, beautiful melodic lines, voicing. Sounds very Lisztian.
It does. And Arrau himself repeated Krause's main advice. Relax and let loose.
Never be stiff or cramped. He even mentioned Krause suggesting sports.
And specific things, too, like having Arrau memorize and transpose individual voices in Bach fugues.
Which teaches hearing polyphony, but also, as you said, keyboard geography, transposition skills. Krause also seems to have been very deliberate about repertoire.
Oh, definitely. A structured progression. Liszt's transcendental etudes early on, interestingly.
But then, say, Mendelssohn before Chopin concertos. Hummel before Beethoven, building technique methodically.
Right. He believed technique didn't develop much after 20. So intense early practice was key. 7-8 hours a day.
Yikes. But Arrau didn't suffer injuries, which suggests Krause's guidance on relaxation was sound.
Seems so. He allowed middle Beethoven sonatas, but held back the late ones, like Op. 111, for later. Though the Hammerklavier fugue, specific Chopin preludes for strength, extracting tough passages for varied practice. It was systematic.
So Arrau credited Krause with the foundation, relax and let loose, but then there's this slight contradiction.
Ah, you mean where Arrau says Krause didn't explicitly teach him about using his arms?
Yeah. He felt his technique was partly a natural gift. He only fully understood later through self-analysis, like using mirrors.
Right, around 18 or 19. seeing rotation, vibration, arm weight. But he also said Krause's principles were the right, natural, and complete basis for it all.
So maybe Krause guided him towards those natural movements without explicitly naming them all.
That seems plausible. Setting up the conditions, the relaxation, the repertoire, letting Arrau's body figure it out, perhaps.
Arrau did mention some specifics from Krause, though, linked to Liszt.
Like how to break chords expressively, different speeds, dynamics.
Exactly. Relating trill speed to the music's Stimmung, atmosphere, the Bebung effect, specific pedaling in Beethoven.
Those point towards that rhetorical, expressive power of Liszt's playing, passed down orally, through demonstration, through stories.
But still you wonder, are those few specific examples enough to explain Arrau's whole technique, his deep Lisztian feel?
It does seem like there might be more to it. It's hard to believe Arrau would feel such lifelong gratitude if Krause only assigned repertoire and gave a few tips.
Right. Krause must have fostered a way of playing, a technique using the whole body efficiently, even if not every motion was spelled out.
Perhaps learned through his own deep dive into Liszt and Liszt's other students.
It leaves us with this slight paradox, doesn't it?
Arrau and the Lisztian legacy.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The chapter kicks off mentioning Arrau's goal. Something about being open to beauty.
Yes, and he directly ties that to how he saw Liszt, his understanding of Liszt's spirit.
And this wasn't just like casual admiration, was it?
Oh, not at all. It went deep. And the text makes it really clear that his teacher, Martin Krause, was crucial here. Krause absolutely instilled this profound connection to Liszt right from Arrau's earliest lessons.
And here's where it gets, well, really interesting. The parallels in their lives, the chapter points out. Both child prodigies, both had these cosmopolitan upbringings.
Right, moving around, exposed to different cultures.
And then, incredibly, both lose these really important mentors when they're just 15.
Yeah, that's striking. Liszt lost his father.
And Arrau lost Krause.
Or at the same age. That shared experience, in such a formative time, it's quite something.
The book even quotes Arrau talking about Liszt, how it was a miracle he became reasonably normal after being a prodigy.
Yes, and Arrau connected that to his own confrontation, his own experience. It suggests a really deep empathy, doesn't it? Beyond just the music.
Definitely. And it wasn't just life events, their technique. They both seemed to think it came from somewhere. Mysterious?
The mysterious inner source. That's the phrase used. Not just from, say, Czerny's structured methods.
Arrau even said he found his technique by myself somehow. That sounds, well, quite romantic in a way.
It does. This idea of it developing organically almost, though obviously with immense work.
Right, not without practice.
Of course not. And the chapter mentions Arrau tackled Liszt's transcendental etudes really early on.
Wow. Those are legendary for their difficulty.
Exactly. Pushing the limits of the piano back then. So diving into those early suggests a real immersion in Liszt's world.
And there's that anecdote about Krause asking Arrau to transpose Bach fugues.
Yes. Just like Liszt said Beethoven asked him to do. Another fascinating thread connecting them across generations.
It really speaks to a certain level of expected mastery, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Formidable command. Now, shifting to the actual technical training. The chapter draws parallels there, too.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about Liszt's early days with Czerny. Rigorous mechanical practice aimed at building strength, endurance.
Right, and Arrau.
Arrau had his own hours and hours on exercises, which Krause meticulously noted down.
What kind of exercises?
Things like double thirds, sixths, octaves, chords, taking up like 2 to 3 hours every single day.
Wow. That's intense dedication.
It really is. It shows both of them saw the need for that rock-solid foundation.
So Liszt also published exercises later on.
He did. 2 sets mentioned. One published after his death by Winterberger, another revised by Krause, actually before Arrau was even born.
And what was interesting about those exercises?
Well, they focused on things like double notes, but apparently didn't give much specific instruction on how the physical movements, beyond maybe fingerings.
So the actual technique might have been passed on more implicitly, through watching maybe.
That's a strong possibility. The chapter really emphasizes that for both of them, exercises were foundational, sure, but true mastery came from engaging with the music itself.
Okay, let's talk about artistic responsibility. Liszt's idea of genie oblige comes up.
Right. Genius obligates. Great talent means you have a responsibility to share it, which is why Liszt taught so extensively.
And Arrau felt that too.
Clearly. He started teaching out of necessity, sure. But the book argues his commitment came from that same Lisztian sense of duty and pleasure in sharing knowledge.
There's that quote. I look upon teaching as a moral obligation with great love.
That really sums it up. It wasn't just a job.
And like Liszt holding masterclasses in Weimar?
Arrau did something similar, teaching students in his own home. More intimate, perhaps, but the same principle.
And neither of them took payment from pupils.
Exactly. Which really underscores that idea of mentorship, of a shared artistic journey, not just a business transaction.
It really feels like Arrau was consciously modeling aspects of his life on Liszt.
Consciously or subconsciously, yeah. The chapter gives even more signs of this identification.
Like, what? This is fascinating.
Get this. Arrau actually played Liszt in a movie.
No way. When?
1935. A Mexican film called Sueños de Amor, Dreams of Love.
He acted.
He did. And apparently, the New York Times review praised his acting and his playing of Liszt's music.
That's incredible. Talk about identification.
Right. And later in life, especially after he turned 70, this Liszt connection was mentioned all the time in articles.
So it wasn't just his own feeling, others saw it too.
Absolutely. Even the commentary on his 80th birthday recital recording explicitly mentions the lineage through Krause.
Okay, so the connection is undeniable. Now, the chapter gets into virtuosity, always a bit of a loaded term.
It is. The chapter frames Arrau's development as moving from those foundational exercises towards virtuosity being, woven into the music, not separate.
But it acknowledges the debate, right? Legitimate expression versus just showing off.
Oh, yeah. It makes the point that it depends on your perspective, composer, performer, listener. But for Arrau, like Liszt,
they were inseparable, technique and musical expression.
Exactly. Liszt is quoted saying, virtuosity lets you reproduce everything that is expressed in art. It's a means to express feeling, not the end goal.
Not just flash and dazzle.
Precisely. The chapter even gives that historical context, the Mozart-Clementi showdown.
Where Mozart called Clementi a mere mechanicus, a technician.
Right. Highlighting that early split between taste and virtuosity, and that negative view of virtuosity kind of hardened in the 19th century.
Associated with commercialism, superficiality.
Exactly. The text mentions Dana Gooley's work on this, and pedagogy reinforced it too, didn't it? All those etudes divorced from music.
Kulak complaining about losing the masters to gymnastics.
Yeah. But then you have Czerny's counter-argument.
Wait, Czerny, the exercise guy.
The very same. He actually argued that technical skill was essential to finding the meaning in music. Technique and expression were interdependent for him.
That's surprising.
Isn't it? He's quoted saying difficult passages could be expressive because of advances in mechanical practice. Technique enables expression.
And Liszt, Czerny's student, felt the same way.
Absolutely. Technique determines expression. There's that strong quote. Virtuosity is not the passive servant of composition. Upon its breath depends the life and death of the artwork.
Wow, so virtuosity is active, creative.
That's how Liszt saw it. Like painting or composing, expressing emotion. He stressed the need for emotional education for both composers and performers. Otherwise, it's just empty finger mechanism.
Charles Rosen's insight is mentioned too, right? Liszt being the first to really grasp the musical significance of new techniques.
Yes. Liszt saw virtuosity as making ideas manifest, bringing them into the real world. And despite critics,
like Mendelssohn or Schumann,
right, who were sometimes skeptical, Liszt, with his genie oblige, fought to reclaim virtuosity as an artistic principle.
And that negative baggage still exists sometimes, even today.
It does. The chapter mentions Kramer's analysis of the B minor sonata, that NYT description of Liszt as a rock star.
Memorable, if a bit much. And even some performers downplayed technique. Levin's grimy engine, Schnebel's athletics.
Right. All this sets the stage for Arrau's take on it. He was very sensitive to how Liszt was received negatively.
He mentioned Liszt's tragic desire for respect as a composer, and that cabal of the German schools.
Yes. So Arrau's aim, it seems, was to showcase those virtuosic bits as musical expression. It was part of his persona, but also maybe a defense of Liszt.
And he saw technique almost spiritually.
As a spiritual discipline, yeah. Finding struggle and triumph in mastering difficulty. He said, difficulty itself is from the composer. He wanted to express something difficult.
Which is why he hated simplifying Beethoven.
Exactly. He felt the difficulty itself meant something, expressed something psychological, a point of conflict. And that idea wasn't just about Beethoven, it permeated his thinking.
Finding the physical and spiritual intersecting in technique.
Yes, he talked about the unity of the body with the psyche in natural playing. Technique wasn't just physical, it was an outward sign of inner character, identity, expressive power.
Okay, let's compare their teaching now. Arrau emulated Liszt in some ways. Masterclasses, teaching as a gift.
Right. But there were big differences, too. Arrau taught a very specific, highly articulated technical system because for him, technique and expression were just completely intertwined.
That anecdote about Goodwin's Sample shows that, doesn't it? Arrau immediately saying he needed a different technique and sending him to Silva.
Exactly, a very clear vision, whereas accounts of Liszt's teaching are, well, all over the place.
How so?
Early on, Caroline Boissier's diary from the 1830s has specific technical stuff, wrist action for everything, avoiding the fingertip, hours of octaves with the wrist.
Flattened fingers, too, like Arrau.
Yes, that's a parallel. But interestingly, Arrau apparently used the whole arm for octaves, not just the wrist, citing others like Carreño, so differences even there.
And later pupils said Liszt taught no technique.
Some did, like Amy Fay, Viana da Mata.
Mm-hmm.
They said he focused just on musicality, interpretation, and demonstrated rather than explaining technique verbally. Goldra's diaries also suggest general advice, not a system.
And the demonstration point is huge. Arrau never demonstrated.
Almost never, according to students. He feared imitation, relied purely on verbal instruction.
Whereas Liszt demonstrated constantly. Boissier called it a highlight.
Absolutely. Vivid descriptions. Later pupils also confirmed his demonstrations, sometimes with a clear teaching purpose.
William Mason's story is amazing. One demonstration changing everything for him. That elastic movement.
Transformative.
Yeah.
But crucially, no record of what Liszt said, if anything. It highlights the mystery of that transmission.
So how do we get more insight into Liszt's technique, especially later?
Well, the chapter looks at secondhand accounts. Tilly Fleischmann's work, based on her studies with Liszt pupils Stavenhagen and Lochmann.
Right. She noted the mix of musical and technical in Liszt's demos. Stavenhagen saying you could learn technique just by watching closely.
Exactly. Her own course starts fairly conventionally, finger exercises, quiet hand. But she does mention Liszt using the whole arm for crisp staccato, forearm rotation for broken figures. Hints of something more.
And that unpublished section on touch and tone. Stavenhagen recalling Liszt wanting rich tone, even in loud chords.
Yes, achieved through whole arm pressure from the shoulder, using body weight. That's pretty significant evidence for arm use.
Then there's Lena Raman's Liszt Pedagogium.
That sounds crucial.
Oh, it's invaluable. Notes from Liszt's own pupils on his compositions. Technical interpretive observations, sometimes direct quotes, published over several years, so it captures a lot.
And it details a lot of techniques.
A huge range. High wrist for force, pedal use, how to end slurs, fingers closed for legato chords, overlapping notes, high hand straight fingers for power, arm use for dynamics and expression in chords and octaves.
Explicit examples.
Yes, harmonies poétique, falling arm from the shoulder, quoting Liszt. Power grows from feeling. Thunnerai, raise your hands high up for chords, but also stressing inward movement, connecting the physical and emotional.
More examples. Mazzoni's piece.
Consolations.
In the Mazzoni, free upper arm attack for power, large movement gives great feeling. Second consolation. Falling arm for accents, varying height changes dynamics, high wrist, vertical arm fall for marcati, modified by character.
Sixth consolation. The swinging arm.
Yes, for contrasting tone and continuity, with that famous warning, no song of praise for Venus, to get the right feeling. Romand's language there might even predate Breithaupt's systematic terms for arm movement.
It's amazing how consistently she links gesture to effect, even different arm motions for left and right hands in the Bach variations.
Right. Left hand melody falling from high up, different from the right hand. Hungarian Rhapsody No. 5. Arm from high above for both power and singing tone.
And the end of that Rhapsody.
Heavy falling motion, raised wrist, firm fingers for those full chords, Ave Maristella, high hand, straight thumb for fortissimo chord octaves.
She contrasts techniques too, right? Within the same piece.
Exactly. Bach variations.
Yeah.
High wrist firm thumb for ascending bass octaves versus light wrist staccato. Funebre octaves. High hand standing thumb for exhilarated power.
What about that vibrato in the Bach?
Likely a rebounding whole arm motion for powerful sound, contrasted with delicate wrist undulations. End of the piece. Tremolo. Rich and ringing with impetus of the full arm. Probably whole arm rotation.
And quieter playing. The back touch.
Yes, in Ave Maristella.
Yeah.
Quiet as hand sunken into itself. Close to keys. Creeping movement. Similar idea in Constellation No. 4. Minimum motion for connection.
And ending slurs. Not abrupt.
Definitely not. Back variations example. Fading out of the tone. Do not lift the hand, losing the connection. Roman even uses extra long slurs to show it.
That's incredible detail. Constellation No. 5. Fingers breathing.
Soft, quiet, inward aspiration of the finger imagined as a spiritual and physical organ of breathing. Amazing imagery. First, Constellation Portamento. Wrist lift, dropping finger, like breathing out a feeling.
And third, constellation accompaniment. Fingers resting lightly.
Yes, more floating than pressing, avoiding wild air, creating a gentle legatissimo. Very much echoes Arrau's legato ideas.
Ramon's use of quotes and italics seems key here.
Absolutely. It underscores that she's conveying Liszt's or his pupil's actual language, showing that direct link they made between movement and musical feeling.
So, summing up Ramon, vibration, high wrist straight fingers, whole arm fall, fingers close. Techniques Arrau also used.
Exactly. It paints a much more holistic picture of Liszt's technique, definitely involving the arm and body. Which brings us back to Arrau believing he shared elements with Liszt.
And his students saw his arm technique as proof of that Lisztian legacy through Krause.
Understandably. But the chapter stresses the question of Liszt's own arm use is still debated in pedagogy. It's not fully settled.
Eigeldinger saying Liszt brought whole arm back weight technique.
Versus Ott's view of Fingershand's wrist within a suspended arm, emphasizing fluid movement, not just dead weight.
Then Gehrig seeing Liszt freeing technique from the stiff finger school. But Davison calling arm weight attribution propaganda, pointing to Boissier and Straddle emphasizing the wrist.
Right. Straddle even claimed Liszt's entire technique was wrist-based, and he'd reject arm theories. But the chapter offers counterpoints.
Like Straddle's acquaintance doesn't mean Liszt never used his arm, and Straddle's own training might have biased him.
Precisely. And wrist movement itself can originate from the arm. Plus, you have Amy Fay's later realization.
The one who initially said Liszt taught no technique?
Yes. Later, studying with Deppy, she realized playing with weight was the secret to Liszt's amazing tone and close key contact.
So the different accounts might just reflect those ongoing debates about finger versus arm technique.
That's the suggestion. And perhaps considering all the accounts gives a truer picture. Liszt likely used his whole body skillfully, which matches Arrau's own description of his technique involving the whole body.
And Krause might have passed some of that arm technique to Arrau.
It's possible. Plausible even. But the hard evidence, it remains inconclusive.
Okay, let's shift to Arrau's own identification with Liszt, this idea of self-construction.
Right. Moving to Germany wasn't just about piano lessons for him. It was about seeking a new cultural identity.
Especially after leaving Chile, losing his father, creating voids.
Exactly. And the piano was dominant from childhood. He grew up where Krause was central, and Liszt was this huge presence.
So Krause as a father figure, Liszt as a kind of artistic grandfather, made the lineage feel natural.
Very likely. That's the idea presented. And that self-analysis in the mirror, after Krause died, seems to have cemented this self-image, tying him to these figures.
So he actively tried to be Lisztian in playing and teaching.
It seems so. The chapter draws that parallel to Liszt's Le Concert C'est Moi. Rudolf Breithaupt.
He was quite the scholar, philosophy, psychology, musicology, and taught piano at Leipzig and then the Stern Conservatory in Berlin, a really pivotal figure.
And his big idea was this weight theory. How did that differ from, the standard teaching of the time?
Fundamentally different. The established method was often about finger technique, building strength in the fingers themselves, keeping them independent. Breithaupt said, no, the real power, the natural way, comes from using the weight of the arm.
He drew a line in the sand then.
He did. He even used the Thalberg-Liszt rivalry as an example. Thalberg for intricate fingerwork, Liszt for that powerful sonority which Breithaupt linked to weight.
Interesting. And he named names. Who did he see using weight?
Oh yeah, people like D'Albert, Carreño, Godowsky, Hoffman, even Rubinstein. On the other side, the fingers-only school, he put Thalberg, Kalkbrenner, Kullak, von Bülow.
So, a clear division. Where did he lay all this out?
His main work was a 3-volume set, Die Natürliche Klaviertechnik, the natural piano technique, Volume 2, especially, The School of Weight Touch, got translated and really detailed the weight principles. Volume 3 had exercises for it all.
Exercises like?
Things like Längsschwung, Rollschwung, focusing on lateral movements, rotation, even specific finger actions within the arm's weight.
And he claimed Liszt was on his side, technique-wise.
He argued Liszt inherently used weight, and he wasn't alone. He saw himself aligned with others advocating arm techniques, like Steinhausen, Deppe, Kaland, building a sort of historical case.
What did pianists actually think of him? I read Carreño felt she was a model, but Schnabel felt like a guinea pig.
Right, reactions varied. But Arrau's experience seems positive. He apparently played for Breithaupt, who was supposedly very enthusiastic, saying, yes, exactly right.
So there was a direct connection.
Definitely. They were both at the Stern Conservatory at the same time, Breithaupt teaching, Arrau studying. Arrau was starting to really analyze his own technique then, so the timing was perfect.
And Arrau, like Breithaupt, pointed to Carreño.
Yes, Arrau called her a perfect example of natural weight technique. But interestingly, Arrau also observed that some of Breithaupt's own students, while using weight, seemed to lack refined finger articulation, so maybe an overcorrection.
Suggests a balance is needed. Both believed in arm weight, but didn't dismiss the fingers entirely.
Exactly. Breithaupt wrote that fingers achieve things with the arm, not in isolation. Arrau constantly told students to use the whole arm with the fingers, letting relaxed weight sink in, not just moving the wrist or forearm independently.
So Breithaupt had a system for teaching this. How did he break it down?
Very analytical. He started with the hand itself, the hand bridge. Think of an arched hand, knuckles slightly prominent, fingers curved. That structure supports the arm's weight.
Okay, the foundation, then what?
Then he looked at how the arm functions. Supporting weight, suspending it, transferring it, also vertical movements, rotation, and only then, really, how the fingers fit in. Totally different from just starting with finger drills.
And this hand bridge, did Arrau actually play like that?
Visibly so, yes. That arched structure was characteristic, especially in difficult parts. Breithaupt saw it as key for aligning the bones efficiently.
And he had exercises specifically for feeling that arm weight in the fingers.
Yep.
Exercises for supporting weight on single fingers, even black keys, dropping weight onto fingers. You see parallels in Arrau's teaching, like his idea of standing in the keys.
Relaxation is another big Arrau concept. How did Breithaupt view it?
Both saw it as vital. Breithaupt focused on localized relaxation during playing, not total limpness, but releasing tension where it wasn't needed. He called it natural equilibrium, a loosening of the joints.
What about vertical arm movements? Breithaupt mentioned those.
He described two main types: a low fall, using arm weight downwards with a sinking wrist for a rich sound, and a high fall, more of an upward or projecting motion using forearm extension.
That sounds like Arrau's downward weight application and his upward forward push.
Very similar concepts, yes. And that forearm extension Breithaupt described, he linked it to a kind of natural vibrato or rebound from the key.
Connecting to Arrau's vibration idea.
Precisely. And the idea of rebound and staccato playing, too.
Breithaupt discussed forearm and whole arm rotation, mainly for things like trills or broken chords. His main exercise, a rule from thumb to fifth, was maybe a bit limited. Arrau put more emphasis on upper arm rotation for evenness.
So Breithaupt was combining movements, vertical, lateral.
Yes, especially for scales and arpeggios, he called them roulades, trying to create smooth, flowing lines, making thumb crossing easier. He saw legato coming from these larger arm movements, not just finger connections. Arrau advised, similarly, minimize finger effort, use the arm.
And the fingers themselves. What was their job, according to Breithaupt?
Primarily to support the arm's weight, keeping bones aligned. Minimal movement needed just to press the key. He strongly disliked tense, overly curved fingers, that cocked gun position. Finger action for him was lifting and lowering from the knuckle.
Which connects to how Arrau's high finger practice was described.
It does seem to align, yes. And crucially, Breithaupt stressed releasing the weight after playing the note, keeping the hand free.
How did dynamics and articulation fit in?
Dynamics came from how much arm weight you used and how fast you depressed the key. Legato, as we said, from arm motion. Staccato was a whole arm rebound, not just wrist flicks, but he was clear. This wasn't anti-finger exercise. It was about finger action with weight.
So summing up the Breithaupt-Arrau connection, it seems quite strong.
Undeniably. Relaxation, weight, the whole arm, vertical lateral motion, vibration, circularity, the parallels are numerous. It really looks like Breithaupt's work gave Arrau a vocabulary, a framework that confirmed his own analysis of technique.
Arrau's concept of technique and virtuosity. So where do we start? What's the foundation of his idea?
The absolute core, the starting point, is that Arrau fundamentally rejected separating technique and expression.
You couldn't have one without the other.
Not in his view. They were intrinsically linked. He actually said something like, if you want to communicate certain phrases or passages, how are you going to teach students if, at the same time, you don't explain how to do it?
How to produce or how to realize
Yeah.
a conception you were giving them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the technique wasn't just a tool you picked up later. It was the way you realized the musical idea itself.
The physical action is the expression, in a way.
That's a good way to put it. And this wasn't just a teaching theory. People heard it in his playing.
How so? What do the critics say?
Well, there was one reviewer who compared him to, the technical giants like Rosenthal and Godowsky.
Big names.
Huge. And this critic acknowledged Arrau had this devilish technique and a worship of sound, but
What?
the motive was different. For Arrau, the critic said it was more for the poetic.
Ah, so the technique served poetry, not just itself.
Precisely. And that same reviewer talked about Arrau's physical approach, the way he used his whole arm, not just fingers, describing it as a triumphant victory over the mechanic.
Wow, victory over the mechanic. That's powerful. It wasn't just efficient, it was expressive triumph.
Exactly. And Peter G. Davis, another critic, saw a similar thing, didn't he? He saw this blend.
And Richard Osborne pointed to his Liszt playing.
Yes, Osborne felt in pieces like the B minor sonata or Chasse-Neige, Arrau reached this point where virtuosity and mystic beauty are sublimely linked.
Not just linked, sublimely linked.
It's that elevation again. Another critic even called his Liszt and Brahms a profoundly spiritual, multifaceted recreation.
Spiritual. That word keeps coming up. It wasn't just playing notes brilliantly.
No, it was channeling something deeper, multifaceted, spiritual, poetic. The technique was the means to that.
So how did he pass this philosophy on? How did students absorb this integrated view?
Oh, it was absolutely central to his teaching. His students really internalized this idea. Edith Fisher, for example, talked about uniting technique and interpretation as the ideal.
The goal to strive for.
Yeah. She said without the whole idea of interpretation that is behind it, the technique itself doesn't mean a thing.
The why gives the how its meaning.
Perfectly put. And Ina Bronstein-Barton tells this great little story about Arrau's assistant, Rafael de Silva.
Oh, yeah.
She brought him a piece, thinking she'd nailed the technical side, And de Silva just looked at her and asked, quite simply, "Dear, can you separate the two?"
Oof. Point taken, I imagine.
Right. It just cuts to the chase. Technique is how you realize the musical intention. They aren't separate tasks.
Okay, so technique and expression are one. But then Arrau pushes this further into territory that feels, well, even more unusual.
You mean the idea about the body?
Exactly. That the body isn't just the instrument for expression, but maybe the source of it.
Yes, that's a key shift. It's not just training the body like a machine. It's recognizing the body's intrinsic connection to the music's soul.
How did he phrase that?
He'd say things like, but the moment you are allowed to raise the wrist along with the entire arm, the phrasing develops naturally.
So a physical movement directly creates musical phrasing.
And here's the really striking part. He seemed to suggest the mind wasn't necessarily the conscious mediator in that process.
What do you mean?
It was like the connection between the body's action and the soul's expression was immediate. A single, immediate, and indivisible phenomenon, as the book puts it.
Wow. So not thinking, I need to phrase this way so I'll lift my arm, but the act of lifting is the soulful phrasing.
It's almost like that, yes. Like the soul speaks directly through the prepared, responsive body.
That idea of physical discipline leading to a kind of spiritual insight, it makes me think of Zen practices.
You're right on track. Actually, German Dessays, one of his students, mentioned that Herrigel's book, Zen in the Art of Archery, was recommended reading.
Ah, okay. So that connection was explicit.
Seems so. Herrigel's book explores exactly that, how intense physical practice, archery in this case, becomes a path to self-realization. The archer isn't just aiming at the target.
They're aiming at themselves in a way, becoming one with the action.
Exactly. And Arrau's students picked up on this. Bennett Lerner saw his own technical growth reflecting a kind of self-realization.
The technique isn't about constructing something, it's about finding the pathway to let that natural expression flow out.
Which connects, I suppose, to another key Arrau analogy: dance. Yes, absolutely. Joseph Horowitz asked him point blank if his technique was about interpreting with the body.
And Arrau said,
A simple, strong yes. He described reaching a stage where once the music is fully absorbed, the movements become automatic. He literally said, at times, I feel very much like a dancer.
so the pianist becomes a dancer at the keyboard.
It's more than just elegant movement, though. The analogy suggests the learned physical actions themselves become inherently expressive. Technique embodies the music.
It's not just solving problems, it's creating aesthetic pleasure through the body's movement.
Right. The performer's unique physicality becomes part of the art. You're dancing the music.
And that echoes Herrigel again, doesn't it? The archery master telling a student to perform rather as a good dancer dances, to achieve that unity, that oneness.
For Arrau, technique was this amazing blend of craft and art. The body wasn't just a machine, it was this unique conduit to the spirit.
Uniting body, music, mind, becoming one with it all.
Exactly. Ivan Nunez, another student, put it so well.
What did he say?
He said, the thing is that the technique incorporates the music into it somehow. It's not two things, music and hitting the keys.
You're one thing with the music, your body, your playing, it's one.
Yeah, one unified whole.
Okay, so that's the philosophy. It's incredibly compelling. But how did he do it? How did he teach this? What was the practical method?
The cornerstone, the absolute foundation of his practical method, was relaxation.
Relaxation. That seems almost paradoxical given the power and intensity needed.
It does, doesn't it? But for Arrau, it was the key. He told Hilda Summer that using the body naturally leads towards a unity of the body with the psyche, body, and soul.
Natural use leads to unity.
And he believed this relaxed approach, feeling the unity of your body and the instrument, actually awakens creativity. It unlocks a tremendous number of creative sources.
The relaxation isn't just about avoiding tension, it's about opening a channel.
Precisely. And crucially, he felt the way to achieve this wasn't through, intense conscious thought about it.
No. How then?
Through the practice of a relaxed attitude, it was about cultivating a state of being, aimed at realizing the unconscious potential, not just drilling finger exercises.
It's training your whole being, not just the muscles.
Yeah.
But what did he mean by relaxation? Was it just being loose?
Not exactly floppy, no. He drew on ideas from people like Breithaupt, but he made it his own. For him, relaxation was primarily about avoiding stiffness, especially in the joints.
Why the joint specifically?
Because he believed stiffness there literally blocked what he called the emotional physical current.
The emotional physical current. Tell me more about that.
He talked about it with Martin Buxban. He stressed never striking the keys, using weight and flow instead. And he said, if you keep the body relaxed, the body is in contact with the depths of your soul.
Okay.
If you are stiff in any joint, you impede the emotional physical current of what the music itself dictates to you. You don't let it go through to the keyboard.
Wow. So physical tension is like a dam, blocking the flow from your soul to the music.
That was his core belief. Now, technically, muscles have to tense and release, of course, but focusing on relaxed joints helped pianists feel freedom. The idea is relaxing the muscles that oppose the desired movement.
So efficiency, yes, but more than that.
Much more. That physical freedom, that release of unnecessary tension, was the gateway. It allowed access to inner feeling, to that creative flow, and to feeling that unity of the instrument with the body.
A two-way street between the inner self and the physical act.
Exactly. And this wasn't something you just get overnight.
No.
Anna Bronstein-Barton emphasized it develops for years and years. You're always finding more and more freedom.
It's a continuous process of refinement.
Absolutely. And Arrau was incredibly dedicated to helping students find it. Hilde Sommer described him literally getting down on the floor to diagnose from all angles what hampered an arm.
Down on the floor.
Yeah, where stiffness prevented fluid execution. He was that committed to finding the physical blocks.
Okay, but I'm still circling back to the intensity. How does this deep relaxation work with, say, a huge fortissimo chord or a really demanding passage.
Right, that's the crucial nuance. Bronstein-Barton called it a mixture of tension and relaxation.
A mixture, not just one or the other.
Exactly. It's not about being limp, it's about knowing precisely how to combine necessary tension with overall relaxation, especially when the music itself has tension. She called it positive action grounded in knowledge.
Positive action. So it's
Yeah.
controlled, directed energy, not just looseness.
Precisely. And to help grasp this active relaxation rather than just don't be tense, they used an image.
An image.
Yeah, from Arrau and Silva, apparently, the empty arm.
The empty arm, what does that convey?
Think of it as giving yourself something to do rather than not to do. The arm isn't held rigid, it feels empty like a sack. Movement starts from the shoulder, flowing down, but the arm stays flexible.
Like a conduit, maybe?
Sort of. You apply focus where needed, at the fingertip maybe, but you don't lock the wrist or elbow unnecessarily. It lets things flow.
That image, empty, connects back to the spiritual idea, doesn't it? Being receptive.
Absolutely. Bronstein-Barton makes that link explicit. Because the body is used this way relaxed, empty things aren't blocked, the flow of the music can happen.
Because music is a spiritual experience for Arrau.
Right. By keeping the body relaxed and receptive or empty, you become a vessel for that experience. You can realize it, communicate it physically. That, she says, is part of the philosophy. To make it so your art, your artistic experience can come out.
The empty body allows the artistic experience to emerge. It's not forcing it, but allowing it.
Beautifully put, and it ties into Arrau's deep reverence for the score, too. The empty body isn't imposing itself. It's yielding to be filled by the music, becoming one with it.
Which gives the whole process of physical training this, well, musical and almost metaphysical dimension.
It really does. So relaxation wasn't just a technique he picked up from Krause or Breithaupt. He synthesized those ideas with Hergel's philosophy, making it the absolute key to his entire system, unlocking unity, flow, and that deep connection between the physical and the spiritual in performance and teaching.
So to recap, Arrau's concept of technique is incredibly holistic. It's inseparable from expression. The body is both source and conduit. It's about unity of mind, body, spirit, almost like a dance, allowing the music to flow through.
It really turns the standard idea of technique on its head.
And thinking about why this matters to you listening, well, even if you don't play piano, Arrau's approach speaks volumes about mastery itself, doesn't it?
I think so. It suggests that true mastery in any field might be more than just mechanics.
It's about embodying intention, finding that flow state, letting your inner something, call it soul, spirit, artistic experience, come through the craft.
It challenges us to think about how we practice anything, really. Is it just repetition, or is it about cultivating a deeper connection? The Arrau Technique. So this is the real nuts and bolts, isn't it?
It really is. This is where we get into the physical stuff, how he actually played, how he taught the mechanics.
Our plan is to unpack these core physical approaches,
Yeah.
things like finger action, hand and arm positioning.
Yeah, and the use of arm weight. Plus, those really specific techniques he was known for, like vibration, rotation, circular motion.
All drawn from this fantastic book. It's quite detailed.
It is. We've talked philosophy, now it's time for the engine room, you know. The physical side that made his sound possible.
It sounds like it's a whole system, not just isolated tricks.
Absolutely. Everything connects. It's not just fingers doing one thing in the arm another. It's
Yeah.
integrated.
Okay, let's start the beginning then. The foundation. Fingers, hands, arms. The book mentions finger firmness, which sounds a bit dangerous, like it could mean stiffness.
Right, you'd think so, but they make a point of saying it's not rigidity. Rosalina Sackstein demonstrated it.
And how does she show it? What's the idea?
Well, the key thing is it's not about locking the finger. It's described as a small pulling movement. The finger actively pulls into the key. Timing is crucial. This little pull happens just as the arm weight engages, so the finger kind of catches that weight deep in the key bed, you know, right at the bottom.
Ah, so the finger isn't the main force pushing the key down.
Exactly. It's working with the arm. The book says the finger action is very limber, very easily going. It just needs to be firm enough to channel the arm weight.
It's that balance that Sackstein linked to finding the proper sound.
Yes. Less about raw finger power, more about the finger being a conduit, directing the arm's energy.
I love that phrase from German Diaz in the book. The finger is the messenger of the arm.
It's perfect, isn't it? Totally reframes it. The power comes from the larger structures,
Yeah.
arm, body, and the finger is just the final delivery point.
Okay, and moving up from the fingers, hands and arms. Arrau had some very specific ways he held his hands, didn't he? You can see it in films.
Oh, absolutely. Very characteristic. Often a quite high arch in the hand, supported right at the knuckles, across the palm.
And the fingers themselves?
They could be fairly straight or just gently curved.
Yeah.
It depended. But that arched structure, Diaz called it a neutral position.
Neutral because it uses the bones for support.
That's the idea. Using the skeletal structure means less muscular effort just to hold the hand shape. It's efficient.
And the wrist, did that stay in one place?
No, it varied. For powerful playing, you'd often see the wrist level with the knuckles, or sometimes even a bit higher.
Higher than the knuckles?
Yes. And that position, combined with the arch and the way the arm aligned over the keys, allowed him to bring in that famous arm weight without getting stiff.
Right, arm weight. This seems central. The book talks about him using his whole arm, even his torso, sometimes with a visible repercussion in his body. That sounds like serious force.
It really does show the amount of engagement. That little bounce or recoil you might see in his shoulders isn't just for show. It's the physical result of deploying significant weight, the hand catching it, and the body absorbing that energy release. It shows power, but also flexibility.
How did he control all that weight, especially for, say, soft playing?
The wrist position, again, is key. By raising the wrist, moving the arm forward over the keys a bit, he could align the arm more vertically.
Okay.
And with that higher wrist, the whole arm is sort of poised. From there, he could either drop the weight for power or suspend it, releasing just a tiny bit for delicate control.
So a high wrist wasn't only for loud playing.
Definitely not. Diaz actually used exercises with arm drops onto fingers 2 and 4 from a high wrist position to teach this.
The point wasn't hitting hard.
No, it was about feeling how the finger catches and supports the arm's weight. So the student feels the weight going to the finger, not just falling past it. Diaz apparently thought the fourth finger was vital here, like the central balance point for the arm.
That's really specific. And the book gives an example, 5.1.6, showing this high wrist used for control in a soft passage, suspending the weight.
Exactly. And then for power, like octaves, in example 5.1.7, you get the whole package. The weight, the high wrist, the arched knuckles, often straighter fingers. He apparently described it feeling like solid bars from shoulder to key, but still controlled.
And this use of weight wasn't just loud or soft, it was for shaping dynamics too, like a crescendo on repeated chords.
Yes, example 5.3.6 shows that. Using downward arm weight for the crescendo, you could see him physically lift his arm, maybe even his upper body slightly, between chords.
Like he was measuring the increase?
Kind of, measuring out more weight for each chord. And the wrist would flex up passively as he prepared, showing the arm was leading the whole movement. It's a very physical way to build intensity. Now, things get a bit more complex, maybe even contradictory. The book talks about Arrau using high finger lifting, but also Diaz having a different view on finger strength.
Right, it's interesting. Arrau definitely did practice and use high finger action, lifting the fingers high from the main knuckle, often quite straight.
Why?
Partly as an exercise for finger independence and strength, but he also used it in performance, like in Carnival examples 5.2.1 and 5.2.2, for a really full, brilliant kind of tone. When the finger comes down from high, the arm tends to move forward too, wrist rising, even engaging the shoulder.
But Diaz wasn't entirely convinced this was the best way.
His perspective was different. He argued that lifting the finger high, away from the body's center, actually makes it weaker and can cause tension.
Weaker? That seems counterintuitive.
His theory was that real strength comes from motion towards the body, like a drawing in or squeezing motion. He felt the strength from high fingers might actually be the arm pushing along with it. For Diaz, the core finger strength was in that inward pull. Okay, that's a useful distinction to keep in mind. Then there's that really puzzling instruction Arrau gave Diaz. Don't move the fingers. What on earth did that mean?
Yeah, it sounds impossible. But it didn't mean freezing them. It meant keeping the fingertips already on the keys, or extremely close, before you actually press down.
So no striking from a distance.
Exactly. The key is then depressed, mainly by arm weight, and the finger does that little subtle drawing in motion we talked about, just to meet and channel the weight.
What's the advantage of doing it that way?
Several things. First, incredible control over volume gradations, because you're metering out arm weight, not finger impact force. Second, much smoother legato, less percussive noise from fingers hitting the key surface or the key hitting the bed.
And endurance.
Yes, big time. It minimizes the physical shock to the fingers you get from constantly hitting from above. Much less jarring.
Diaz had that door analogy for this, didn't he?
He did. It's so clear. Hitting a door from a foot away, loud bang, door barely moves, maybe hurts your hand. But place your hand on the door and push with the same effort. It closes smoothly, quietly, no discomfort.
Perfect illustration of efficiency and control.
Exactly. Starting in contact versus striking.
And Arrau used this for passages needing extreme control, like the Arietta from Beethoven's Opus 111.
Absolutely. Keeping the fingers close allows that incredibly controlled, ethereal sound. But what's fascinating, and the book points this out, is in measure 5 of that same piece, during a crescendo, Arrau visibly lifts his fingers before playing. A deliberate choice.
Breaking his own rule.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it produces a noticeably different sound, slightly more articulated, maybe a touch percussive.
Yeah.
It just shows how conscious he was of the link between the physical motion and the resulting tone quality. He chose the motion for the sound he wanted.
That's a crucial insight. The physical action directly creates the sound, so let's pin down firmness versus stiffness again.
Okay? Firmness is active, that drawing in motion, timed with the arm weight, connected to good alignment. It's about engaging towards the key. Stiffness is static. It's what happens if you keep pushing after the key is already down. Unnecessary pressure.
How do you avoid that stiffness then?
Simple. Don't keep pressing. As soon as the sound is produced, withdraw most of the weight. Suspend it above the keys using the larger muscles of the upper arm and shoulder.
And the fingers.
They just relax, resting lightly to hold the key down if needed, but with minimal force. The keyboard itself helps a bit too, with its natural rebound.
Diaz's analogy about walking.
Yeah, you don't keep pressing your foot into the floor after you've taken a step, right? Same idea. Release the pressure once the key hits bottom. There's impact, but no visible tension afterwards. He releases instantly.
Okay, that clarifies things. Now let's get into some of these really specific Arrau techniques. Staccato first. How does that fit in?
Well, it still uses that drawing in finger motion for the initial impulse, like legato. But the big difference is no weight stays down.
So the finger goes down and comes right back up.
Not quite up. It depresses the key with arm weight, then immediately withdraws. But the withdrawal isn't a straight lift. It's more of a relaxation, letting the finger continue its inward curve until it just loses contact.
So it's a curved motion, not up and down.
Exactly. Small, continuous curves or circles at the fingertip, not angular.
The Schumann concerto example shows different types.
It does. For the quietest T-piece staccato, you see definite finger motion, but very light arm weight. Then for the portamento, those dots under a slur, the finger motion gets much smaller, almost invisible, but the arm makes bigger controlled drops.
So it shifts.
Yeah. As he moves towards legato, you see less obvious finger movement and more arm weight involved.
Yeah.
But the underlying principle of curved finger motion remains.
Okay, now for the really unique stuff. Vibration. Described as fast bounce. What is this?
Okay, vibration. This is really core Arrau, I think. It's basically harnessing the piano's natural rebound energy. Think of it as a very fast staccato or non-legato, where the finger and a very free arm coordinate in this rapid bounce off the keys.
Diaz called it a rebound.
Yes. It's mainly for passages needing loudness, speed, and clarity, though he could adapt it. It's great for crescendos, helps coordinate double notes.
And crucially, endurance. How does it help with that?
By reclaiming energy. Because you're working with the key's upward bounce, not fighting against it.
How does that work mechanically?
You need a really free arm and wrist. They have to react when the finger hits the key bed. That impact creates an upward impulse. Vibration times the next note to coincide with the arm dropping back down from that bed.
A loop.
Exactly. Downward gravity, upward key rebound, downward gravity. Diaz said, the impact throws the arm up. It will drop back again. Another finger picks it up. The effort becomes minimal, just placing the finger in that slight inward pull. The arm's motion is largely reactive.
So the arm isn't actively pushing down repeatedly.
Not really. The whole arm is carried from the shoulder, loosely. Forearm and wrist are passive in the bounce itself. The finger's little inward pull seems to initiate it, like catching the arm or triggering the rebound.
And you can vary it.
Oh, yes. Bigger finger motions, more weight, means a slower, louder, more detached bounce. Smaller, lighter means faster, softer, maybe smoother, but still lively. It gives a very sharp, articulate sound, even if the motion itself is subtle sometimes. Example 5.6.4 notes that the speed affects how articulated it sounds.
Where can we see or hear this clearly?
Example 5.6.3. Schumann preambule, you can see the wrist and arm bouncing to bring out a weaker part. Fast scales use it. Fortissimo bits like Carnival M109, you hear that incisive sound, and you can see the bounce, especially when he slows down. Even with pedal, it gives clarity. Look at the octaves and chords in Carnival's Valse Allemande. You see finger actions, bit of shoulder movement, subtle arm adjustments, high wrist for black keys, all feeding into that vibration. Or the 6 in Pantalon at Columbine. Arm adjusts, high wrist, and vibration gives power and makes sure the notes sound together. It really shares the load with the fingers. It's key for endurance in that bright, defined sound.
Fascinating. Okay, next technique, rotation.
Rotation involves turning the forearm in hand pronation, palm down, and supination, palm up, which makes the arm tilt or rock sideways.
Is it just the forearm twisting?
No. And this is crucial, according to Diaz. He showed that if you only use your forearm to try and turn your palm outwards, you feel strain. The upper arm has to rotate in the shoulder socket for the movement to be free.
Why is that?
Because of the forearm bones, the radius and ulna. When you pronate, palm down, they cross. This structure naturally favors the thumb side if you only rotate the forearm. Try it on a table. Rest your hand, palm down. You can easily lift the thumb side just by twisting the forearm, but you can't lift the pinky side much without engaging the whole arm from the shoulder.
So upper arm rotation balances things out.
Exactly. Rotating from the shoulder allows you to ultimately raise the fifth finger side and the thumb side easily.
What does that look like, the upper arm rotation?
Often quite subtle. You might see the upper arm move slightly away from the body, then back towards it, facilitating the hand's tilt.
Where would he use that?
Upper arm rotation is great for things like fast, quiet, broken intervals, like in Beethoven Op. 53. It helps suspend the weight for pianissimo. The left hand uses it a lot for broken chords, bass notes, helping with leaps.
So when would pure forearm rotation be used?
More specifically, when you need extra power or reach from the thumb side, like in Schumann's Paganini Etude, where the thumb has to reach across quite far. Forearm rotation gives it that extra push and lift. Also sometimes for sustained notes with repeated figures underneath, a small forearm rotation keeps the fingers close. It's mentioned for thumb movements in the Appassionata too.
And Diaz's pole vault analogy for the thumb.
Yeah, a great image. For crossing the thumb under, say, the third finger, it's not about lifting the thumb high, but about a lateral shift rotation around the third finger pole, making space for the relaxed thumb to swing through. He linked this mainly to upper arm movement, providing that space.
Okay, finally, circular motion. This sounds like it ties things together.
It really does. Circular motion isn't one single technique, but more like a way of combining techniques, arm weight, rotation, vibration, finger timing, into one fluid, continuous gesture that follows the musical phrase, often involving curves.
Arrau himself analyzed a Brahms passage using this.
Yes. From the D minor concerto, he described it as circling out with the arm, dropping heavily on the thumb using rotation and vibration, all with tremendous weight, a complex combination.
Wow. What would that look like physically?
Powerful. Wrist rising, arm pushing up and forward, hand tipping for accents, then the arms tracing these outward circles through the arpeggio, fingers often straight, rotations happening within the arc, and that heavy vibration applied throughout. It's a big gesture. Diaz broke down the mechanics. It starts with organizing the whole arm to the finger. Finger meets key, arm recoils up forward if it's relaxed. The power is the arm behind the finger. But crucially, the arm mustn't keep pushing after the key is down. That recoil is relaxation.
He talked about resting on the fingers here too.
Yes, connecting back. Circular motion involves feeling like the hand is resting on the active fingers while the arm traces the curve, often following the hand's natural arch. He demonstrates by circling his elbow and wrist smoothly over a 5-finger pattern, example 5.8.4, rising over the longer fingers, dropping on the thumb.
To avoid choppy movements.
Exactly. This resting avoids those exaggerated flapping motions that don't actually connect to the keys effectively. Maybe what Liszt meant by don't make omelet.
So the wrist isn't leading.
Bronstam Barton said the wrist is passive, moved by the arm. Diaz seemed to agree ultimately the arm pushes the finger and guides the hand through the phrase. The finger doesn't pull the arm along.
Where do we see circular motion applied musically?
All over the place, really. Sometimes you reverse the circle, like in a Chopin prelude. The Chopin Aeolian Harp Etude, Opus 25, number 1, is full of it, managing leaps by circling out to position the hand. Musically, it shapes phrases fluidly, avoids sounding mechanical, even in simple accompaniments. Think of broken triads, like in Beethoven's Waldstein, circling through each one, dropping lightly on the thumb, pianissimo, then rising with rotation, using that upward energy perhaps to stress the top melody note.
It sounds very expressive.
Immensely. Look at the Mendelssohn Rondo climax. Flexible wrist, circular motions for accents, power. Compare Arrau's later Waldstein, more economical motion, subtle arm body involvement, inward circles for triplets, adding vibration for a rougher sound. Then contrast again with quiet lyricism like the up one of an arietta. Minimal up-down, fingers closed, weight suspended, just subtle inward-outward circles preserving that linear flow. Then back to fortissimo in Waldstein, B13 adding vibration again for intensity. It's incredibly versatile.
It's so clear how all these movements are linked. Let's try and sum up this Arrau technique as a whole system.
That's really the takeaway. It's not a collection of separate tricks. It's this deeply unified system. Arm movement works because the fingers provide the right kind of support. Vibration needs the arm's freedom. Rotation needs the shoulder. It all flows together.
And the book notes his fingerings were chosen to support this integration.
Absolutely. Fingerings weren't just about hitting the right notes. They had to facilitate the phrasing, the sound, the expression, enabled by the free arm and body. Apparently, his student De Silva even sold copies of Arrau's fingerings.
Okay. And you mentioned avoiding hitting the keys earlier. How does this system prevent that?
Well, Bronstein-Barton defined hitting as combining falling and pushing simultaneously. Arrau insisted, either fall or push. Falling is letting gravity act, maybe from a height. Pushing starts with contact and applies upward force.
And hitting is bad because
It maximizes mechanical noise, gives a harsh percussive sound. Arrau generally avoided it by using controlled weight from a supported position, often starting close to the keys, and managing that rebound.
Speaking of rebound, that downward drop causing an upward reaction makes it tricky to define motion sometimes.
Yes, Diaz called that immediate upward bounce after hitting the key bed a push-up. It's so quick, so integral, that the down then up can feel like one continuous reciprocal motion rather than two distinct actions.
And this down-up reciprocal motion was used deliberately for shaping.
Oh, absolutely. It was a fundamental schema or pattern for him, especially for slurred notes or poggiaturas. First note gets the downward weight, usually louder. Second note, usually softer, is played during that upward rebound phase, flexing up as the arm recoils. Montalcino described this as a consistent formula in Arrau's playing, like in Beethoven Op. 31. 2, he'd use this down-up to shape pairs of notes, maybe slightly separating them. And it wasn't just for slurs. Think about rhythms like the 16th dotted eighth in the Op. 111 arietta. Downward on the short 16th, flowing seamlessly into the upward motion on the longer dotted eighth. That upward motion on the longer note helps draw weight out, allows relaxation, and really aids endurance in those kinds of repetitive rhythms. You see it in Schumann's Carnival, too. Efficiency and endurance. So these down-up motions shape dynamics in appoggiaturas, but they also feature in faster music, like Mozart. Although there, the book notes, the motion might look more complex because the rebound is so immediate after the initial drop, and he then has to subtly manage that upward phase for the softer second note. It's layered. Arrau's collaboration with Rafael de Silva. Okay, so let's start by setting the scene. We need to understand the circumstances that brought these two together. We're talking Berlin, just after World War I. A tough time.
A really tough time, yeah. Arrau's early years back in Berlin after the war were marked by real difficulty. Post-war Germany had severe economic problems.
Right, hyperinflation and all that.
Exactly. And on top of that, in 1921, Arrau's stipend from the Chilean government, the thing that had supported his studies since he was a child, it stopped.
Wow. So a young guy, his whole life focused just on piano, suddenly has to earn a living.
Pretty much. He was barely 20, and he had to start teaching to support his mother and sister who were living with him. That's a major shift.
And he'd also lost his mentor figure not long before, hadn't he? Martin Krause?
Yes, that's critical. Krause, who was Liszt's student, died when Arrau was only 15.
Huge loss.
Massive. Krause wasn't just his teacher. He was like the central male figure in his life, guiding him musically, personally.
Yeah.
His death left a huge void.
So he was sort of adrift.
Yeah, the source puts it like he was removed from a sheltered childhood dedicated exclusively to piano training and abruptly thrust into the adult world with very little experience or social connections. Didn't have many friends outside music.
And this is where Rafael de Silva comes in.
Right on cue. Also in 1921, de Silva arrived in Berlin from Chile. He started studying with Jenny Krause, Martin Krause's daughter.
Ah, the Krause connection continues.
It does. And interestingly, they might just might have crossed paths briefly in Chile earlier that year when Arrau was touring there.
But it was Berlin where the real connection formed.
Yeah, in Berlin, De Silva became more than just another student or someone from home. He became a friend, a really crucial one.
How so?
Well, De Silva was 2 years older, and he sort of became a social guide for Arrau. Remember, Arrau had this incredibly focused, almost isolated upbringing, all piano.
Right.
De Silva helped him figure out the practical stuff, the social side of being an adult in Berlin. One of Arrau's later students, German Daes, specifically mentions Rafael helping Arrau with many social things after Krause died.
Okay, so you've got this foundation. Two young Chilean pianists in Berlin linked by Krause's legacy. One really needs a friend, a guide outside the practice room.
And the other arrives and fits that role perfectly. And this friendship, well, it eventually grew into this vital professional teaching partnership. Well, the collaboration seems to have started pretty early, back in those Berlin days. But it's interesting, De Silva didn't really pursue a performing career himself later on.
Oh, why not?
The sources say he suffered quite badly from performance anxiety, from nerves.
That's surprising, given his role in teaching performance.
It is a bit paradoxical, isn't it? But apparently he was very good at helping students manage their own stage fright. Anyway, he eventually became Arrau's teaching assistant in New York.
Though they moved to New York together.
Well, they both ended up there. Though there's this interesting little detail, an ad from the New York Times in 1943 shows De Silva advertising his own studio, and it says, formerly associated with Claudio Arrau.
Huh. So maybe the formal joint teaching setup in New York solidified a bit later?
Could be. It suggests they weren't working together in that formal assistant capacity right away in 43, but it definitely did solidify.
Wow.
By 1947, Arrau actually registered his teaching activities formally as the piano school. This is probably partly practical, helping international students get visas to come study in New York.
Makes sense. And Arrau's performing career was taking off, right? Lots of touring.
Hugely. He was away for months at a time, often. And that's where De Silva became absolutely essential.
He kept things going.
Exactly. From about 1950 onwards, De Silva basically was the continuity for Arrau's students during these long tours. Anna Bronstein-Barton, another student, described it clearly.
How did it work?
She said De Silva would give students 2 90-minute lessons every week. Really intensive prep work.
Preparing them for what?
Preparing them for Arrau's return. Arrau would come back and give these incredibly concentrated master classes, sometimes packing everything into just 2 or 3 days.
Wow. So De Silva's lessons were crucial for students to actually benefit from that limited time with Arrau. He wasn't just a placeholder.
Not at all. He was integral. There's a quote from Yvonne Nunez saying, "People I know, they all studied with Rafael. He's a very important part of this thing." De Silva provided that continuity, that deep preparation that made Arrau's focused bursts of teaching really land.
Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of it. What were they teaching? The philosophy, the lineage, the actual method. What were those Arrau masterclasses like?
Well, the sources paint a picture of a really intimate setting. It was about deliberately tackling complex musical and technical issues. Arrau might pause, maybe confer quietly with De Silva.
So De Silva was often there in the master classes too.
Yes, often observing or participating quietly. Arrau might also chat briefly with observers or share stories, his views on composers, other pianists. Liszt came up a lot.
Yes, the Liszt connection. That seems so central for Arrau.
It was profound. Arrau consciously modeled parts of his teaching on Liszt. He saw teaching as this almost sacred mission, a legacy that had to be passed on, just like Liszt felt.
And how did that translate practically?
Well, like Liszt, Arrau often taught his own master classes without charging a fee. Students usually paid De Silva for those essential preparatory lessons, but not Arrau directly for the master class itself.
Interesting.
And also, like Liszt, he favored the masterclass format. Bronstein-Barton put it well. His sense of teaching, it was a mission to be passed on. Liszt was like that. He thought that Liszt was a great spirit.
And De Silva was the key person for actually transmitting the practical side of this.
He really was. Students said De Silva was brilliant at transferring Arrau's particular way of playing, philosophy to music, and his whole way of thinking.
So how did they divide the labor, so to speak?
It seems Arrau focused more the music than the technique. He dealt with the big picture, the interpretation, the artistic vision. De Silva handled the technical groundwork.
How to.
Yeah, exactly. Things like how to lift your arm, how to use the weight. De Silva made sure the physical technique lined up with Arrau's artistic goals.
So a real partnership.
Yeah.
Shared vision, but different roles. Did they ever disagree in lessons?
Well, on fundamental musical ideas, students seemed to feel they were completely aligned. No difference of opinion there. But students did notice differences in their approach, maybe in flexibility.
Flexibility, how so?
Several students described Arrau as being more flexible than De Silva. Duranitas shared an interesting perspective.
What did he say?
He said if he worked on a passage with De Silva might insist on a very specific fingering or gesture. But then, if Diaz played it for Arrau, maybe trying a slightly different way he'd found.
Arrau might accept it.
Arrau might say, yes, that is correct. Diaz felt this flexibility came from Arrau's massive performing experience. He knew what really worked under pressure on stage, which might allow for different valid solutions.
That makes sense, the performer's perspective. So how did students see De Silva's approach then? Was it just rigid?
Edith Fisher had an interesting take. She felt De Silva's occasional fixedness came from this incredibly deep desire to be absolutely faithful to Arrau, to pass on every single detail exactly as he understood Arrau meant it. This fingering, this gesture, and this phrasing.
He wanted to get it perfectly right.
Exactly. He had this precise picture. That was Arrau's playing. But here's the complication.
What's that?
As Fisher also pointed out, Arrau's own playing wasn't static. It was in a constant evolution.
Ah. So De Silva might be faithfully teaching something Arrau himself had already subtly shifted away from.
Precisely. That's the potential tension. De Silva, in his dedication, might hold on to a principle, while Arrau, the constantly evolving performer, had maybe found new nuances. Bennett Lerner saw it partly as personality, too.
Oh.
He described Arrau as much more patient and much more willing to accept differences, whereas De Silva could seem much more pedantic and difficult to please. So, same core principles, but maybe different tolerances for variation in applying them.
That's a really subtle and fascinating dynamic. The performer evolving, the assistant striving for perfect fidelity.
Yeah.
Maybe to a slightly earlier version.
It could seem that way sometimes, yeah. And it really underlines De Silva's other crucial role reinforcement.
Ah, right, making it stick.
Absolutely vital. Bronstein-Barton called Arrau's lessons sometimes a feverish experience. So intense, so high level. You might play brilliantly, but leave completely overwhelmed thinking, what on earth just happened?
Been there. Not with Arrau, obviously, but that feeling.
Right. And that's where De Silva came in. Bronstein-Barton said, and then there was Rafael to tell you exactly what happened and go over it very slowly, again and again, so that it would stick.
Wow. That follow-up sounds absolutely essential.
It was that consistent review, the detailed drilling, the technical refinement De Silva provided. That's how students could actually consolidate the insights from Arrau's more inspirational, high-level teaching. Students who had De Silva really felt they absorbed it more deeply.
Sounds like such a powerful, synergistic system they had built, which makes the end of that partnership quite sad.
It is poignant, yeah. Rafael De Silva spent his last 10 years in Munich. He's diagnosed with cancer, and tragically, he took his own life on June 14th, 1981. It was the day before his 80th birthday. Germandis confirmed he was very ill and, well, didn't want to continue suffering.
That's incredibly sad. Such a key figure. What happened to Arrau's teaching after De Silva passed away?
Well, his absence left a huge gap. Without De Silva's constant help and preparation, Arrau's teaching really lost its continuity.
How so?
Before, students could study for years, right? De Silva kept their progress going during Arrau's long tours. Afterward, there was no one to do that. No one to provide that consistent guidance or reinforce the lessons while Arrau was performing around the world.
So the nature of being an Arrau student must have changed quite a bit. Less long-term immersion.
It seems so. Anna Bronstein-Barton noted that later students, without De Silva's steady support, had to try and absorb everything in much shorter, more concentrated bursts.
And maybe that wasn't always enough.
She felt it might have been inadequate for some to really internalize the full depth of his approach. She commented, there are people out there who've had a few lessons with Arrau and then call themselves Arrau students. Because I think this approach takes a while, this was not an instant thing.
That makes sense. And it seems Arrau himself, maybe his public comments about the partnership shifted later.
Yeah, the source material notes that in some later comments, Arrau seemed to perhaps downplay De Silva's absolutely crucial role.
Like how?
For instance, he's quoted saying, for a while there was a system with Rafael De Silva as my assistant. The students would work with him and I would more or less provide the final touches.
Final touches. That sounds quite different from the student accounts we just heard.
It does. It contrasts sharply with how essential students felt De Silva was. The source suggests that maybe, with De Silva gone and that established teaching group dissolved, the possibility for his principles to be really deeply integrated faded.
And Arrau's focus shifted.
It seems his focus and perhaps enthusiasm shifted more fully back to his incredibly demanding performing career. The teaching structure just wasn't the same.
So that unique, direct collaboration ended. But the legacy, the principles, they didn't just vanish, right? They were carried on by the students.
Absolutely. While most were aiming for performing careers, many of Arrau's students also became really significant teachers in their own right.
Yeah, the source lists quite a few names.
Yes, teaching at major schools and universities all over the world, people like Josefina Migret, Olga Berabini, German Diaz, Anna Bronstein-Barton, Philip Lorenz, many others.
And their teaching wasn't just about, like, copying Arrau.
No, not at all. They actively amplified his principles. They weren't just preserving them rigidly, they were adapting and transmitting them. Arrau had instilled this idea that teaching was a mission, remember?
Right, to pass on what was given to me.
Exactly. And his students often echoed that, seeing their own teaching as fulfilling that mission, doing it with, as one said, great love.
So the real authenticity wasn't in perfect imitation, but something else.
Precisely. The source emphasizes this. The authenticity wasn't about sticking to fixed, unchanging practices. It was rooted in the personal connection, the teacher-student exchange, the shared identity, the emotional energy that drove the transmission.
So students were empowered to understand the core ideas and build on them.
Yes. They weren't just trying to be clones. They were encouraged to think, to develop, to expand on the principles.
And what was maybe the absolute core principle, the heart of this knowledge that was passed down, especially the part De Silva helped ground?
A really central element was a specific physical approach to playing music. The source calls it a tradition of bodily experience learned by ear.
Bodily experience learned by ear. What does that mean practically?
It involved using natural body movements, adapted specifically for sound and musical gesture. Yeah. It was rooted deeply in Arrau's belief that technique and expression are totally inseparable, and that physical relaxation is actually a source of creative energy. It wasn't just intellectual stuff. It was a physical, felt knowledge. You absorbed it through hearing Arrau, through doing it yourself, through De Silva's detailed work. It developed technique and shaped musical understanding simultaneously.
Wow, that really paints a picture. A physical legacy almost, passed down through sound and movement, stretching back to Liszt.
It's a rich tradition for sure.
Okay, so we've covered the history, the partnership, the philosophy, the legacy. Now let's get into the most vivid part. The actual lesson room. The appendices in the source give us these amazing detailed excerpts from real lessons.
Yeah, this is where it gets really concrete.
Let's dig into those. Maybe instead of going piece by piece, we can pull out some recurring themes, see how Arrau's principles showed up across different music.
Great idea. We could start with one of his most distinctive tools, using really vivid imagery to unlock the music.
Oh yeah, that came up earlier. What are some specific examples from the lessons?
Okay, well, right at the start of the Chopin Ballade in G minor, he told the student to begin as if it rises up out of the water. The first note should be almost imperceptible.
Wow. That's so much more than just play quietly.
Exactly. It gives a whole atmosphere of physical feeling. He used phrases like emerging from the water or mist. Then in Ravel's Scarbo, he connected bits to Bertrand's poetry, mentioned Ondine a little, or described a mood as same window, same night, specific scene settings.
Setting a mood, giving it character.
Definitely. In Ravel's Ondine, he talked about bringing out the life of the water in the arpeggios, or describing sounds as underwater, or certain bits as mischievous bars.
Mischievous bars, I love that. It's so specific.
It is. It bypasses purely technical talk to get at the musical feeling. He also used really strong character words. For Beethoven's Diabelli variations in Variation 9, he used words like volontarioso, eigenwillig, willful, crazy, even insane, actually discussing the shades of meaning with the student.
Debating the exact German word.
Yeah. Or describing the end of a phrase as having resignation. In the Beethoven Opus 110, you see passionately lyrical, swimming, and very tender. It's always about character and feeling, often sparked by an image.
That's fascinating. Okay, another big theme seems to be his incredible focus on the score itself, like really digging into it.
Absolutely. And not just playing the right notes, he was almost like a detective with the score, often checking original manuscripts, questioning printed editions.
Why was that so important to him?
It showed his dedication to getting as close as possible to what the composer first intended. He questioned editorial decisions made later. In the Chopin Ballade, he pointed out phrase marks in Chopin's manuscript that were ambiguous and noted how original pedal markings were different in later editions.
So he didn't just trust the printed page.
Not blindly, no. In the Liszt Burlesque, same thing, focusing on manuscript title marks, noting if they were maybe off the beat in a way editions smoothed over. With Ravel's Ondine, there was discussion about missing accidentals or ties in the common Durand edition compared to others.
So he was teaching students to be critical readers, not just passive players of whatever edition they had.
Exactly, and you see this really clearly in the Beethoven Diabelli Variations excerpts. Huge discussions comparing editions, Breitkopf, Henle, whatever the student brought, noting differences in articulation, ties, even pitches.
Wait, wrong notes in an edition.
Yeah, like an E flat in Variation 1 that was different in one edition. Arrau insisted, just these two notes. This you have to correct, please. He suggested editors might have changed it for the first edition, but students shouldn't just follow arbitrary changes. He was teaching critical thinking about the source.
That's serious stuff.
And in Opus 110, he was meticulous about rhythm, even chanting patterns to get the exact feel, insisting on the difference between, say, 16th notes and quintolets.
5 notes in the time of 4, right?
That's the one. He wanted that rhythmic character absolutely clear.
Okay, so imagery, critical score study. What about the technical side? We know De Silva handled a lot of that, but Arrau must have addressed technique in the master classes too.
Oh, he did, but usually framed within the musical result, or the physical feeling needed for the sound. Remember, for him, technique and expression were totally linked.
Right. Any examples?
Well, in the Chopin Ballade, he advised pushing up on sixths.
Pushing up. That sounds backwards.
Yeah.
Usually you think of playing down into the key.
It does sound counterintuitive, but Arrau felt pushing up engaged the fingers and hand differently, giving more security and a better sound than just letting the hand drop. He told students to exaggerate it when practicing slowly, to really feel it.
Connecting the physical action directly to the sound.
That's the key. In Rafael's Scarbo, for arpeggios, he didn't want distinct notes. He wanted them blurred.
Blurred arpeggios. That sounds radical.
He insisted playing them distinctly was absurd and false, and in that specific piece, maybe impossible. The goal was an effect, an emergence, linking back to imagery again.
Right.
He also constantly pushed for relaxation, even in really agitated music like Scarbo. He'd say, no rushing, that is rushing, you have to relax.
Relax while playing something incredibly fast and difficult.
That was the goal. In Ondine, for smooth legato, he suggested using portamento.
Like a singer sliding between notes.
Kind of, yeah. That seamless connection. And for some octave passages, he warned against too much vibration or tension, suggesting dragging the hand instead for the right sound quality.
Dragging the hand. These are such specific, almost unconventional instructions.
They came from his deep physical understanding of sound production. In the Diabellis, his dynamic instructions were about the concert hall reality, play those chords loud in the concert, make the people jump out of their seats. He felt students played them too timidly in lessons.
Bringing the performance context into the lesson.
Exactly. And he insisted on true legato where needed, correcting staccato assumptions based on additions, like for the B-flats in Variation 11, must be sustained, he said.
So even basic things like legato staccato weren't always just what was printed. You needed Arrau's musical context.
Right. And he'd suggest fingerings, debate options. In Opus 110, for passionate bits, he stressed only dynamics, not tempo changes, rushing through in a good sense, funkle and sparkling. He advised exaggerating dynamics in practice.
Really internalize them?
Yeah, and he even explained how to create the illusion of a crescendo on a held note, using the other hand a physical technique for an oral effect.
Creating illusions with sound and touch. That's pretty amazing. And all these technical points, these physical details, this must be where De Silva's consistent work was absolutely crucial.
Totally. Arrau provides the vision, the image, the musical goal. De Silva then works with the student, reinforcing these specific actions, fingerings, ways of using the arm over and over, making sure the technique serve the vision. It's that integrated approach.
Looking across all these examples, the imagery, the score focus, the physical technique tied to sound, you really see Arrau's principles come alive. Not just theory, but applied in the messy reality of making music happen.
And you absolutely see De Silva's vital role in making that happen, helping students translate these sometimes abstract concepts into real physical musical results that would actually stick.
So wrapping this up, what does this whole deep dive into the Arrau de Silva partnership and these lessons mean for us, even if we don't play the piano?
Well, I think it offers a really powerful model for how complex knowledge and deep skill get transmitted. You see the value of having that dedicated partner like De Silva who handles structure, details, reinforcement.
And nuts and bolts.
Right. And then the value of the master, Arrau, offering the high-level insight, the inspiration, the guidance, rooted in huge experience.
And also the importance of engaging critically with the material itself, like questioning the additions.
Yes, absolutely. Arrau pushing students to look beyond the printed page. And it highlights the challenge of truly embodying abstract ideas, taking something intellectual and making it physical, making it action. This partnership shows how profound learning often needs both that visionary spark and dedicated, consistent follow-through.
It really shows learning isn't always just one teacher, one student. It can be this whole dynamic system, this ecosystem. Which I guess brings us to a final thought for you to chew on.
What does it really mean to transmit knowledge or skill effectively? Is it about demanding perfect replication, rigid adherence to one fixed method?
Or is it something maybe richer? About empowering the student to grasp the core principles so deeply they can apply them flexibly, carry them forward, maybe even evolve them further.
Yeah, just like Arrau's own playing was always described as being in constant evolution. Which path truly carries the legacy forward?
Thank you so much for listening. We hope this episode has given you meaningful insights and sparked your interest in the book we explored today. Just a reminder, this is only a brief summary and not a substitute for the full reading experience. We encourage you to read the original book to truly appreciate its depth. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss future episodes. And if you'd like to support our channel, feel free to share this video with friends. Every share helps our community grow.